What happens when the one who always dissolves into others finally dares to choose themselves? Pause for a moment. Feel that question settle into your chest like a stone dropped into still water. Watch the ripples spread outward, touching every relationship you've ever had, every time you've said yes when your soul whispered no, every moment you've given so much of yourself that you forgot there was a self to give. Can you feel it? That slight discomfort, that gentle rebellion rising in your chest as you consider the possibility that maybe, just maybe, you've been loving wrong all this time, that what you've called compassion might actually be a sophisticated form of self-erasure, that what you've called empathy might be a beautiful but devastating form of spiritual disappearing act. This isn't just another conversation about empathy. This is about the very nature of consciousness itself, how we lose ourselves in the dance of connection, and what happens when we finally remember that we, too, exist in this cosmic choreography. We're talking about the difference between love that expands you and love that erases you, between connection that nourishes your soul and connection that slowly devours it. And if you've been feeling invisible in your own life, if you've been wondering why you feel so drained after helping others, if you've been questioning whether love is supposed to hurt this much, then you're already standing at the threshold of a great awakening. The question is, are you ready to walk through the door? Today, we're going to explore a journey that millions walk in silence, the path of the empath who awakens not from compassion, but to it. Because there's a difference, you see, between love that includes you and love that erases you, and most of us have never learned to tell them apart. Picture this. You are a mirror, but you've forgotten you have a back. Everyone sees their reflection in you, their needs, their emotions, their unspoken hungers, and you've become so good at showing them what they need to see that you've forgotten what you look like when no one is watching. But let's go deeper. Imagine that this mirror has been polished so thoroughly by the hands of others that it's lost its own substance. It reflects perfectly, but if you were to turn it around, you'd find nothing but emptiness. This is the existential predicament of the modern empath, brilliant at reflecting others to inner worlds, but increasingly transparent when it comes to their own. This is the burden of the empath, not the gift of feeling deeply. That's beautiful. That's part of what makes the human experience so rich and textured. The burden is living as if your feelings don't matter, as if your needs are somehow less real, less urgent, less deserving of attention than everyone else's. It's the crushing weight of being emotionally available for everyone except yourself. But here's what Alan Watts would have recognized immediately. This isn't actually empathy. This is a sophisticated form of self-abandonment that we've been taught to call virtue. It's a spiritual bypass disguised as compassion, a way of avoiding the difficult work of self-awareness by focusing entirely on others. Awareness. Think about it deeply. When did you first learn that your pain was less important than someone else's comfort? When did you first discover that love meant making yourself smaller so others could feel bigger? Was it in childhood, watching a parent sacrifice endlessly and being told that this was what love looked like? Was it in school, learning that the quiet, helpful children were the good ones while the ones who expressed needs were labeled difficult? Or perhaps it was absorbed from a culture that celebrates martyrdom and calls it love, that confuses self-destruction with selflessness, that teaches us to measure our worth by how much of ourselves we're willing to give away. Consider this. Somewhere along the way, you learned that your value lay not in who you are, but in what you could provide. Not in your being, but in your usefulness. Not in your authentic presence, but in your ability to make others comfortable by absorbing their discomfort. The true tragedy isn't that empaths feel too much. It's that they've been conditioned to believe that feeling their own feelings is selfish. They live as emotional refugees in their own lives, always ready to flee their inner landscape the moment someone else needs shelter. They become experts at everyone else's inner weather while losing touch with their own emotional climate. And so they become experts at everyone else's inner world while remaining strangers to their own. They can tell you exactly what their friend needs to feel better, but they can't remember the last time they asked themselves what they need. They can sense the subtle shifts in a room's energy, but they've lost touch with their own emotional weather. This is what happens when empathy becomes performance instead of presence, when it becomes something you do to earn love, rather than something that flows naturally from love. But consciousness has a way of refusing to stay buried forever. There comes a moment, And every awakened empath knows this moment intimately, when something inside simply says, "Enough. I am here too." It's rarely gentle, this awakening. It doesn't arrive like a sunset, gradual and predictable, giving you time to adjust and prepare. It's more like lightning, sudden, illuminating, impossible to ignore. One day you're nodding along to someone's demands on your time, your energy, your very life force, and suddenly you hear a voice you haven't heard in years, your own, and it's saying no. The word feels foreign in your mouth, like speaking a language you once knew fluently but haven't used in decades. Your tongue stumbles over the syllable. Your throat tightens. Your whole body rebels because it's so accustomed to being a yes machine that no feels like a betrayal of your very identity. But once you say it, once you feel the strange relief of honoring your own boundary, of choosing your well-being over someone else's convenience, you begin to see the invisible architecture of your relationships, the elaborate contracts you never signed but somehow agreed to, the unspoken deals that traded your authenticity for acceptance, your presence for approval, your soul for the security of being needed. You begin to realize that half your connections, maybe more, were built on a foundation of your self-erasure. People loved the version of you that never said no, never had needs, never took up space, never caused inconvenience. But did they love you, or did they love the service you provided? Did they love your essence, or did they love your absence? This is the great revelation, the moment when the fog clears and you see with devastating clarity, not everyone who says they love you actually sees you. Some love the vacancy where yourself should be because it gives them room to expand. Some love your empathy because it means they never have to develop their own emotional intelligence. Some love your giving because it means they never have to learn the art of reciprocity. Some love your pain because it makes them feel less alone in theirs. Some love your fixing because it means they never have to grow. Some love your listening because it means they never have to develop the capacity to hear. The awakening isn't cruel, but it is brutally honest. It shows you the difference between people who love your essence and people who love your absence, between those who see you as a person and those who see you as a function, between relationships built on mutual recognition and those built on your self-negation. Now, consciousness doesn't wake up the same way in everyone. Like rivers finding their way to the sea, there are different paths this awakening can take. Let me share with you what I've observed in the great theater of human becoming. The first is what I call the slow sunrise, the gradual awakening. These souls begin to notice, almost by accident, that they have needs too. Maybe it starts with something small, choosing a different restaurant, expressing a preference they usually keep hidden, asking for help with a task they normally handle alone. It's like watching the dawn break. You don't notice it happening until suddenly the world is bright. These awakeners often have the gentlest journey because they're not fighting against their nature so much as gradually remembering it. They discover boundaries the way a gardener discovers where one flower ends and another begins. With patience, with curiosity, with respect for the growing process. Then there's the lightning strike, the crisis awakening. This happens when life becomes unsustainable, when the weight of everyone else's needs finally crushes the last remaining spark of self. It might be a health crisis brought on by chronic stress, a relationship that finally demands too much, or simply the accumulated exhaustion of a lifetime spent in service to others. Happiness. These awakeners often feel like they're being torn apart, but what's really happening is that they're being torn free. The false self, the one that existed only to please others, is dying, and death is rarely comfortable. But what emerges from this dissolution is often the most authentic version of themselves they've ever known. The third path belongs to the learner of limits. These empaths wake up through education, through books, conversations, therapy, or teachings like this one. They begin to understand intellectually that boundaries are not walls but bridges, that saying no is not an act of cruelty but an act of clarity. They practice like students learning a new instrument, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes beautifully, but always with intention. And finally, there's the integrator, perhaps the most fascinating of all. These awakeners don't reject their empathic nature. They revolutionize it. They discover that being whole doesn't diminish their capacity for compassion, it expands it exponentially. When you include yourself in your circle of care, you don't have less love to give. You have more, much more. The integrator realizes that the most compassionate thing they can do is model what healthy empathy looks like. They become living examples of how to feel deeply without drowning, how to care without self-destruction, how to love without self-abandonment. Which path speaks to you? Can you see yourself in one of these journeys? Remember, there's no right way to wake up, there's only your way. But let's be honest about what this awakening costs, because consciousness always demands a price, and the price of selfhood is often the loss of relationships built on selflessness. First comes the guilt. Oh, the guilt. It rises like a tide, whispering that you're being selfish, that you're hurting people, that you're betraying everything you were taught love should be. The guilt says, who are you to have needs? Who are you to take up space? Who are you to choose yourself? It speaks in the voices of every authority figure who ever taught you that goodness meant self-erasure. The guilt is particularly cruel because it uses your own compassion against you. It points to every disappointed face, every confused friend who can't understand why you've changed, every family member who misses the old you, the one who never caused problems because you absorbed them all. It weaponizes your sensitivity, turning your greatest gift into an instrument of self-torture. But you have to learn to answer the guilt with truth. I am the one living this life. I am the one responsible for my soul's well-being. I am the one who must face myself in the mirror every morning and live with the consequences of my choices. But here's what the guilt doesn't tell you, what it works very hard to hide. Their disappointment isn't your responsibility. Their inability to love the real you isn't your failure. Their need for you to be smaller isn't your obligation. Their discomfort with your growth isn't your problem to solve. The guilt wants you to believe that choosing yourself is abandoning others, but this is a lie. When you choose yourself, you're modeling what healthy love looks like. You're showing them that it's possible to care without drowning, to give without depleting, to love without self-destruction. Then comes the loss. And this might be the hardest part of the entire journey. You begin to see with startling clarity which relationships were genuine and which were transactions. Some people, when they realize you're no longer available for emotional dumping, for endless favors, for one-sided support, for being their personal emotional regulation system, simply disappear. They don't fight for the relationship. They don't try to understand your growth. They don't even seem curious about who you're becoming. They just quietly fade away like shadows when the light changes direction. And this tells you everything you need to know about what they were really there for. It hurts. Let's not pretend it doesn't. To realize that someone's love was conditional on your self-negation is a special kind of heartbreak. To discover that you were valued not for your being but for your self-betrayal is a wound that cuts deep, but it's also a gift, a painful but necessary liberation from the exhausting performance of being what others need instead of who you are. And then there's the risk, perhaps the most terrifying part of all, the fear that in learning to say no, in establishing boundaries, in choosing yourself, you might lose what makes you special. What if you close your heart too much? What if you become hard, cold, indifferent? What if in saving yourself you lose your gift of connection? What if in protecting your sensitivity you accidentally destroy it? This fear is real, and it's valid. The empath's sensitivity is often their greatest treasure, the thing that makes them feel most alive and connected to the mystery of existence. The thought of losing it can feel like spiritual death, like trading your soul for the sake of survival. When you're no longer bleeding out your life force to everyone who asks, you have so much more to give to those who truly see and value you. So how does one learn to be whole? How does the empath maintain their gift while reclaiming their selfhood? It starts with a radical realization. Saying no is also an act of love. When you say no to what drains you, you're saying yes to what nourishes you. When you refuse to enable someone's emotional dependency, you're giving them the gift of learning to self-soothe. When you stop rescuing people from the natural consequences of their choices, you're allowing them the dignity of growth. This isn't cruelty. This is compassion with wisdom. Next comes the recovery of your voice. For years, maybe decades, you've been so focused on hearing others that you've forgotten the sound of your own thoughts. You need time to remember what you actually think about things, what you actually want, what you actually feel when no one else's emotions are clouding your inner weather. This might mean taking time alone, real alone time, Not the kind where you're mentally rehearsing conversations or worrying about others. Time where you can hear your own heartbeat, your own breathing, your own inner wisdom trying to speak. Then comes the beautiful work of rebuilding relationships on new foundations. Instead of connections based on your depletion, you create bonds based on reciprocity. Instead of relationships where you're always the giver, you allow others the joy of giving to you too. You discover that real love, the kind that actually nourishes instead of depletes, includes mutual respect, shared responsibility, and the understanding that everyone in the relationship has needs that matter. And perhaps most importantly, you learn that authentic empathy is different from codependent empathy. Authentic empathy feels with others while remaining anchored in yourself. It offers genuine support without losing its own center. It says, "I feel your pain, and I also feel my own capacity to help in healthy ways." This kind of empathy is actually more helpful than the self-sacrificing kind, because it comes from strength instead of weakness, from choice instead of compulsion, from love instead of fear. Now here's something beautiful that Alan Watts understood deeply. No one awakens in isolation. When one person chooses wholeness, it creates ripples that touch everyone around them. Think about it. When an empath finally learns to honor their own needs, everyone in their orbit is suddenly faced with a choice: grow or leave. The people who truly love them will be inspired by their courage and begin their own journey toward wholeness. The people who were only there for what they could extract will reveal themselves by their departure. But it goes deeper than personal relationships. When someone models healthy empathy, compassion with boundaries, love with self-respect, care with limits, they're teaching everyone around them that it's possible to be sensitive and strong, open and protected, loving and whole. Children watch and learn that they don't have to choose between caring for others and caring for themselves. Partners discover that love doesn't require self-erasure. Friends realize that support can be mutual instead of one-sided. The awakened empath becomes a teacher simply by living authentically. They show the world that you can feel deeply without drowning, that you can love without losing yourself, that you can be available without being dispensable. And in a world full of people who have learned to survive by being needed, the example of someone who chooses to thrive by being real is revolutionary. This is how consciousness evolves, not through grand gestures or cosmic revelations, but through individual souls choosing to be whole. Each person who refuses to abandon themselves in the name of love makes it a little easier for others to make the same choice. We are witnessing, I believe, a collective awakening of empaths who are tired of being emotional caretakers and are ready to be emotional equals. This isn't the death of compassion, it's the birth of mature compassion, wise compassion, sustainable compassion. The return to wholeness is not a destination but a daily practice, a constant remembering, a continuous choice to include yourself in your own circle of care. It's learning to love yourself as devotedly as you love others, to treat your needs with the same urgency you bring to everyone else's crises, to honor your feelings with the same respect you show to others' emotions. So we come full circle, as all true journeys do, but we arrive at a different place than where we started. What happens when the one who always dissolves into others finally dares to choose themselves? They don't become selfish, they become whole. They don't lose their empathy. They refine it into something more beautiful, more sustainable, more genuine. They don't stop loving others. They finally learn to include themselves in the circle of love. And in doing so, they discover what real love actually looks like. And in that inclusion, something magical happens. The love becomes real in a way it never was before, because love that doesn't include the lover is not love. It's forgetting. It's a beautiful form of spiritual amnesia, where we remember everyone except the one doing the remembering. It's incomplete, unbalanced, ultimately unsustainable. When you finally choose yourself, you're not abandoning others. You're modeling what it looks like to be a complete human being. You're showing the world that it's possible to be deeply connected without being completely merged, profoundly caring without being chronically depleted, beautifully sensitive without being constantly wounded. You become living proof that empathy and self-respect are not enemies but allies, that compassion and boundaries are not opposites but partners, that love and self-preservation are not contradictions but the natural rhythm of a healthy soul. The question I want to leave you with: The question that could change everything if you're brave enough to answer it honestly is this: where in your life are you still confusing love with self-abandonment? Where are you giving from depletion instead of overflow? Where are you being needed instead of wanted, useful instead of valued, indispensable instead of irreplaceable? And more importantly, what would it look like to love yourself as devotedly as you love others? What would change in your life if you treated your needs with the same urgency you bring to everyone else's emergencies? What would become possible if you stopped trying to earn love through self-sacrifice and simply allowed yourself to be loved for who you are? All of who you are, including the parts that have needs, the parts that take up space, the parts that sometimes say no. What would happen if you finally admitted that you matter too? That your life has value beyond what you can provide for others? That your presence is a gift, not just your service? That you deserve to be loved not for what you do, but for who you are? The awakening isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you've always been beneath all the conditioning, beneath all the people-pleasing, beneath all the beautiful but exhausting performance of being what others need. It's about excavating your authentic self from under layers of others, expectations, and finally letting that self breathe, speak, choose, love. You are not here to complete others by making yourself incomplete. You are not here to fill others' emptiness by emptying yourself. You are not here to heal others' wounds by keeping your own wounds open. You are here to love fully, and that means including the lover in the love. Because when you finally remember yourself, when you finally choose to show up as a whole human being instead of a half-lived service provider, you don't just transform your own life. You give everyone around you permission to be whole too. You become a beacon of possibility, showing them that it's safe to have needs, safe to have boundaries, safe to be human. And that, my friends, is how the world heals. Not through more self-sacrifice, but through more authentic selves. Not through more giving until it hurts, but through more loving that includes everyone, especially you. Not through more empaths burning out in service to others, but through more empaths learning to tend their own inner fire so they can share its warmth for decades to come. This is the great work of our time, learning to love without losing ourselves, to care without depleting ourselves, to give without diminishing ourselves. It's the difference between sustainable compassion and martyrdom, between healthy empathy and emotional codependence, between love and self-abandonment, and it starts with you, right here, right now, with the simple, revolutionary act of including yourself in your own heart. If this exploration resonated with something deep in your soul, if you found yourself nodding along or feeling seen in ways you rarely experience, I invite you to subscribe to this channel. Each week, we dive into these deeper questions of consciousness, authenticity, and what it means to be fully human in a world that often asks us to be only partially present. And if this conversation sparked something in you, a recognition, a hope, a gentle rebellion against the idea that love requires self-abandonment, please share it by hitting that like button. Let's create a community of people who are choosing wholeness, who are discovering that the most radical act of compassion might just be including ourselves in our own circle of care. Until next time, remember, you are not too much, you are not too sensitive, and you are not responsible for completing everyone else by remaining incomplete yourself. You are here to love fully, and that love, by its very nature, includes you.